As the Soviets grew stronger and stronger across the pond, the influence of America started waning. And soon, with our nation destabilized, Richard Nixon was forced to dissolve the United States of America. Out of its ashes, we, the American People's Commonwealth, rose up, securing the Northeast for ourselves. Listening to our name, you might think we are communists, but we aren't. We are revolutionary socialists, standing against the Soviet Union and their fascist abomination. While we are the most economically powerful nation in the former USA, we still face plenty of problems. There is a minor problem of trade union corruption in our western states, and we stand isolated on the global stage due to the opposition to both the Soviets and conservatism. But the biggest problem out of all is our political deadlock. While we at first were a united big tent socialist party, political infighting has only grown in recent time. We have Noam Chomsky, our current president, an idealist revolutionary. There is Bernie Sanders favoring democratic socialism, and then many other groups such as the New Guard with their central committee. This division can be shown by the fact that despite Chomsky opposed the bill to build a wall with the remnants in our south, the chamber still passed it. Then there is a big issue with terrorists. Our Indiana governor was kidnapped, but fortunately by starting an immediate investigation she could be rescued. Then in Vermont, Governor Sanders has been fighting an insurrection for 2 years, which almost killed him. However, with an enormous military raid we could end it too. But these two events were tiny in comparison to what would happen the 1st of May. The day which would have been used to celebrate the International Workers' Day. Instead, 2 airplanes were hijacked from the Chicago International Airport and collided with both the National Economic Center towers, bringing them crashing down, killing thousands. This has turned the day into one of mourning. All our flags will be flown at half-mast, but we can't let us be faced by this horrifying act. Then the terrorists would succeed. We will grow from this into a stronger and more united nation. However, this attack is a big problem for Chomsky. Even the previously apolitical Technological Council's chief, Bill Gates, has criticized him. Subsequently, he has gone into damage control, firing the governor of New York, putting the blame on him, and proposing the American Peace Act, which sadly for him was shot down by the Central Committee. And as Chomsky's popularity falls, Bernie Sanders has decided to take action, holding a speech with clear anti-Chomsky meaning in order to unite the population against him. Because this nation doesn't need a dictator like Chomsky in power. What we need is greater freedoms and democracy. So even though Sanders is progressive, he has met with both conservatives and communists who both would benefit under a democracy. This, together with his already strong popularity in New England from their powerful trade councils and in Boston, has made his support big enough that Bernie decided to take the next step in his plan. He resigned as governor of Vermont in order to be appointed to the Central Committee, currently loyal to Chomsky. And in the committee he plans to gain enough seats to initiate a leadership election, win it and become president. Since the committee currently is divided between the old and the new guard, Sanders, as a part of none of them, can exploit this to show everyone how broken our system currently is. And with support from workers as well as the population as a whole who support him through small donations, he has enough strength to leave the IVV and form his own party, the Socialist Party. And he isn't alone, as his supporters from Boston have joined him in the party and in the Central Committee as well. With his popularity among the people also rising every single day, even parts of the government are starting to advocate for this movement, making the IVV lose seats left and right to his Socialist Party. It had all grown into the perfect storm for Sanders, and he decided to launch the last part of his plan. He and his allies in the committee called for an emergency session where more than half of the chamber demanded new leadership. This forced the speaker to call a vote, which Bernie Sanders won. So Noam Chomsky has been democratically ousted from power, and an inauguration will immediately be prepared to make Bernie Sanders the next president. During its preparations, Bill Gates, the chief of the American Technology Council, received compromising information regarding upcoming President Sanders. These classified documents described how his chief of staff and managers had stolen funds from the Vermont government for personal use. However, with little to no evidence, Gates decided to burn the documents and forget about the incident. But just 2 days after, a second envelope arrived at his home, and what he found inside shook him to his core, with hard evidence that it was true as well. Now comes the difficult decision: should he burn the evidence again or risk his life releasing the documents to the public? After considering for a day, he decided to release them immediately, holding an announcement inside New York City Hall and releasing the documents on the internet at the same time. In them they described how Bernie Sanders orchestrated the May Day attacks by paying large sums of money to terrorist groups from around the world in order to bring down the Twin Towers and Chomsky's approval rating with them. And as the press got a hand on these documents, they concluded that it all could be true, that the person who is about to become president was the one who killed thousands. And the evidence simply kept on coming as even pro-Republican terrorists spoke out about previous terrorist attacks. All this has of course created immense amount of chaos around our country. New York and Philadelphia were the first cities to erupt in riots, with Sanders supporters hurling threats at who they call Lying Bill, and counter-protesters demanding Bernie Sanders' head. Government officials have promised a rapid prosecution, but nothing can be done to stop the flood waves who have spread throughout our whole nation. And it's all made worse by the disappearance of Sanders, who has probably fled the country as the documents were released. And even after all this, the flood of evidence hasn't stopped. An anonymous source from our military has leaked even more documents revealing that every single trade council except the technology and automotive councils have connections with Sanders, known his plans and even supported them. A day later, a video of Sanders being beheaded was released, so at least we know he isn't an issue anymore. But his actions have been irreversible. The economy and our currency have, for example, completely collapsed upon themselves. Most trade councils are still corrupt and evil, and the country still lies in complete chaos. In response, a large group of military officers have made their way to Philadelphia and unconstitutionally declared Noam Chomsky as unfit to continue his leadership, and have instead proposed to Bill Gates the Commonwealth presidency. Fortunately for our nation, he decided to agree because as it was he who revealed the horrifying documents, many see him as a perfect leader. With the army putting him into power instantly after he agreed, he could start working at once, appointing his allies in the Technology Council as ministers and starting to write a new constitution. And unlike our first, this one will be written in New York City. After 35 days, it was put into place, abolishing the Central Committee and its political deadlock, giving all power to Gates to reform our country into his ideals. And these ideals and ideology go under the name of Gatesism. It is where a small government of scientists, industrial leaders, engineers and foreign policy experts gather to manage a collectivized economy. The constitution was also completely formed by these ideas. And the second thing it did was to move our capital to New York. Fortunately, the constitution was well received by the population and most protests stopped. However, the old political class are furious. So they must be purged. For years they have engaged in corruption and some even in terrorist activities. They deserve no amount of power in our new order. This purge also included the weakening of all other councils who oppose Gates' presidency. And so, with it secured, he has held a speech on what it is he will focus on during his first years. Technology. With the now powerful Technology Council, we will drive our country to a new age of enlightenment and not only be at the forefront of development in America, but in the whole wide world. And those who will ensure the success of this quest are of course our scientists. To help them out, we will raise our spending to enormous amounts, probably the highest per capita in the world. Most of it will go straight to research projects, but some will also be used to build new research centers. We will also focus on getting them into our government to strengthen our technocracy, an ideology which Gateism has taken a lot of inspiration from. Some have also called it oligarchic, and it is, but with hints of socialism. Additionally, this isn't a bad thing, because it isn't capitalists who are the oligarchs, but those who know their best about their field. Looking back to our research spending, we've expanded it but into more narrower focuses. For example, industrial development, since we are currently ongoing a steady industrialization, and military development, since we need better equipment to defend ourselves and maybe even reunite the USA. And this military development will put significant emphasis that all our branches should cooperate. Because even though our army is by far the biggest, the Navy and Air Force play an incredibly important part of our defense. With our Air Force also being smaller than that of the Republicans in our south, we've started creating a new and improved fighter aircraft. During all this, Gates had prepared and unveiled his 5-year plan. Designed together with our technocrats, it will help us achieve our goals of enlightenment through new economic prosperity. An interesting part about this plan was to uphold media freedoms. During the Chomsky days it had been shaky, something which Sanders apparently wanted to fix. We will use us of Sanders' idea and strengthen the freedom of all medias. Looking back to our scientists again, our investments have paid off, with a bunch of new scientists being educated and allowed to start new projects. For example, synthetic rubber processing is currently being developed, so we don't have to import it anymore. Having now been in power in 2 years, Bill Gates has decided that it's time to utilize our might. On the west coast, the communists have already started moving east to unite the states under themselves, and the American Republic in our south has also expanded by uniting with Texas. So we too must start expanding if we want to be the ones who unite our broken America. Bill decided to start with the Great Lakes, and while we won't be able to have our whole army against them, 13 infantry to hold and 8 motorized divisions will hopefully be enough. The only scary thing is that they have mechanized, which we don't. But it didn't matter, because we got unexpected help from the American Republic. So we are now in a race who can capture the most territory first. Even though the Republicans had captured their 2 biggest cities, we got most of the land, which has opened the front with the West Coast communists, who just defeated Warren Buffett and his liberal states. This means it's only us 3 left, with all being about equally strong, implying that no one dares to strike first, since the other 2 could team up. But Bill still plans to attack both once we are ready. But to be ready, we must expand our army and industry to produce the new aircrafts and create tank divisions. For our army, we've started training 24 infantry divisions, and for our air force, our scientists have soon designed the last part, the engines. The tanks, however, will take a little longer. However, before we were finished with any of them, the communists, the strongest out of us 3, declared war on the Republicans. And while we now have the chance to ally either of them, Gate has instead decided to declare war on both, despite none of our expansions being finished. The Republicans responded by immediately attacking us. Most attacks were easily repelled by our wall, but they were scarily close to break through in Virginia. Fortunately, by desperately defending, we could hold them off. Then we noticed a grave mistake on their side. They are trying to break out of Washington DC to relieve the encircled city. This is incredibly stupid, since half of the forces in the city are now unable to defend, allowing our motorized to drive past most fortifications and defeat their 2 divisions guarding the previous capital of the USA. During this short conflict, the communists had also attacked us and were even advancing some tiles. Fortunately, through 3 factors, we could hold the supply hub in Fargo, a counter-offensive, their troops being tired and reinforcements from Washington DC. Having now withstood 2 attacks, Gates decided to launch our own in Iowa, where the Republicans are having supply troubles. Firstly, we painstakingly crossed over the Mississippi River to capture the city of Davenport and its supply hub. Then we continued with 2 motorized to the next city, also encircling several of the Republican forces together with the communists. It took quite a while to clear them out due to their staunch nationalism, but soon enough all forces were destroyed. However, we didn't stop there. The communists have a foothold over one of the Mississippi River's tributaries. If we instead have a hold of it, we could defend this area much easier. So we started attacking, and after a while they had been pushed over the river. But instead of stopping there, we continued over it, capturing Des Moines and its rather important supply hub. Now we stand before a crossroad with 2 options. Either we attack the Republic, the easier of the 2 options, since they are already having trouble against the communists. Or we help the weaker Republicans by attacking the communists instead. After long discussions, we decided that the best course of action would be to continue against the communists. Otherwise, we might find us fighting against them alone. During this discussion, our F-16 fighters entered production, with a heavier variant also being planned. But back to the front, it's time we deal some actual damage to the communist forces. The communists did a massive miscalculation not to expect an offensive from our side, because we've defeated the majority of their army in Texas, putting them over 1 million casualties. And since the communists had already weakened the Republicans, it doesn't matter that we now must fight against the 2 alone, since we have more deployed men than both their armies combined. The Republicans are even so weak that there are several gaps in the front. So what are we waiting for? Using the backbone of all our offensive, our motorized, we continued the Texan invasion that the communists had already started. Using the gaps, we quickly drove past their defenses deep into Texas, reaching every major city. There were so few defenses, half of our motorized could even continue to Louisiana, capturing New Orleans and encircling all divisions in Texas. After destroying them all, the Republican army has been reduced to a minuscule 12 to 24 divisions. This means they have no divisions available to guard the recently opened front in Louisiana and Arkansas. Of course, we used this to our advantage, driving west with our trucks and our infantry trying their best to keep up. Soon we reached Atlanta, their capital, but sadly too late to capture their leadership. So we continued into every single direction, focusing mostly in Florida. Here we met some resistance, but through speed they were outmaneuvered and we quickly approached Miami. Just before the city was entered, the Republican forces started surrendering and their leadership soon followed. This means Eastern USA is completely under our control, and with the war against the communists quite far away, we can already start efforts to integrate all these new territories, from the Great Lakes to Texas. But let us not get distracted with peace, we still have the communists to defeat. Here our generals have prepared 2 offensives, one to California and the other to Washington. We've decided to start with the southern one since it's the hardest with its mountainous terrain. This allowed our enemies to entrench and hold off our first few attacks. However, with air superiority achieved with our new fighters, the defenses were soon crossed, and with that we steadily advanced towards the first goal, Salt Lake City. As it was captured, the communist forces were so disoriented a gap had been discovered in their defenses, which we used to arrive to our next goal, Las Vegas. Continuing from there, our motorized entered California, capturing city after city in its south, then driving north until reaching San Francisco and its neighboring cities. With all major cities in California now captured, we will start our second offensive. Due to the perfect terrain, this was far easier than the southern one, with our motorized breaking through only some day after starting the fight. And with that we could simply drive along Route 90 towards Seattle and Portland. As Seattle was entered, the communists surrendered and we stand as the only contender left. But before we can proclaim America reunited, we first have to integrate all our new territories. With the East already integrated, this took less than a year. Subsequently, the 9th of April, 4 days after Italy shocked the world by uniting their European Union, Bill Gates proclaimed the United American Commonwealth. And while most of his speech was focused on its goals to bring technological advancements to all of America, it also included demands to the Mexican, Hawaiian and Canadian governments, who all occupy previously American lands. And these demands are backed by our military, who has only grown after the end of the war, with now over 2 million men in the field or training, as well as our tanks finally being produced and battle ready. The Canadians, allied with Hawaii and Australia, refused to hand over Alaska, so we immediately prepared for war. The Mexicans, however, were smart enough to surrender their 2 territories. About a week later, we started our invasion of Canada. It started small in southern Ontario, but after only a week we had captured Toronto with our tanks, so we expanded the operations. After another week or a bit more, Ottawa and Montreal had been captured, basically securing all major cities in eastern Canada. But we still continued entering Quebec City and the more eastern Nova Scotia Peninsula. During these last offensives, our tanks had been shipped to the west to start capturing the big cities there instead. The first to fall was Vancouver, but they still didn't surrender, so we moved to Alberta, where its 2 major cities soon also were captured, forcing the Canadians to accept defeat. With this defeat, the Alaskan and Hawaiian government surrendered as well, while the Australians drew itself out of the conflict. In the peace deal, Gates decided to simply annex everything, declaring at the same time our conquests over. What comes now is a cold war between us and the Warsaw Pact. While the Warsaw Pact is the strongest, the split between the Europeans and Soviets is almost inevitable. And we aren't completely alone. We have Belize and Trinidad and Tobago in our new American Socialist Pact. I know, scary. Anyways, with our superior research, we will soon become the strongest economically and militarily. However, any war with the Warsaw Pact would be outlandish. So thanks for watching and see you in the next video.